The Cathar Empire stretched across 17 star systems, a testament to technological superiority and unwavering determination. For 8 millennia, they had conquered and subjugated, their expansion unimpeded by any force they encountered. Their society functioned as a perfect machine, hierarchical, disciplined, and utterly convinced of their cosmic supremacy. Lesser species were, at best, resources to be exploited, at worst, obstacles to be removed. Emperor Xandros sat upon his crystalline throne aboard the flagship Eternal Dominion, reviewing the hollow displays of their next acquisition. LV-87, or Typhon Primus, as his cartographers had named it, rotated slowly in the projection, a verdant sphere veined with brilliant blue waterways and shrouded in swirling cloud formations. Initial scans had classified it as a Deathworld, a designation reserved for planets with extreme environmental hazards and aggressive native life forms. But the Cathar Empire had conquered Deathworlds before. The Crillium deposits are the largest we've detected in a millennium, Your Eminence, reported Science Minister Vex, her scaled fingers manipulating the hologram to highlight glowing nodes beneath the planet's surface. Enough to power our fleets for centuries. Our preliminary probes detected minimal human presence, likely a small research outpost or unauthorized settlers. Xandros's multifaceted eyes narrowed. Humans, that persistent mammalian plague spreading through the outer systems. Their technology was primitive compared to Cathar standards, but they multiplied and adapted with alarming efficiency. Still, a minor concern at best. Dispatch the 9th Expeditionary Legion, the Emperor commanded. The Void Claws should make short work of this assignment. Governor Tarak stood at the viewport of the assault carrier Merciless, watching as his elite troops prepared for deployment. The Void Claws were the pride of the Cathar military. 10,000 warriors equipped with the most advanced weaponry, armor, and training the Empire could provide. They had subjugated 32 worlds without a single defeat. Their name was spoken with reverence throughout Cathar space and whispered in terror beyond its borders. Tarak himself had overseen 18 planetary conquests. His carapace bore the traditional scars of victory, etched with ceremonial acid after each successful campaign. His reputation for swift, decisive action had earned him the Emperor's favor and this prestigious command. He turned from the viewport as the doors slid open. 3 officers entered, his command staff for the Typhon Primus operation. "Governor," said Tactical Officer Vorl, offering the traditional Claude-chest salute. "The drop pods are prepped for deployment. Troops will be ready for insertion in 3 hours." Vorl embodied the Cathar military ideal, methodical, logical, and rigorously by the book. His blue-tinted exoskeleton marked him as a member of the strategic caste, bred for analytical thinking and tactical precision. He had served with Tarak for 7 campaigns, providing the careful planning that complemented Tarak's bold strategies. Beside him stood Sergeant Kale, a veteran warrior whose green-black carapace was crisscrossed with battle scars. Unlike the officers, he had risen from the warrior caste through sheer survival and prowess. His left antenna was severed halfway, a reminder of a close encounter with native fauna on the ice world Glacius 6. The troops respected him in a way they never could the highborn officers. The 3rd officer was xenobiologist Ilera, unusual among the Cathar for her fascination with other life forms. While most Cathar scientists approached alien biology solely from the perspective of identifying weaknesses, Ilera studied with genuine curiosity. Her paler exoskeleton marked her as a member of the scientific caste, and the bioluminescent patterns along her carapace pulsed with subtle colors, an augmentation that allowed her to detect a broader spectrum of energy frequencies. "Governor, I have concerns about the preliminary scans," Ilera said, her voice melodic compared to the harsher tones of the military castes. "The biosphere readings from Typhon Primus show unusual patterns. The flora and fauna appear to demonstrate coordinated behaviors typically associated with networked intelligence, not just isolated organisms." Tarak made a dismissive gesture with his secondary limbs. "Irrelevant. Our armor can withstand any organic threat. The most ferocious predator is nothing against our pulse rifles. With respect, sir, Vorl interjected, there are also energy anomalies in the vicinity of the human settlement that our probes couldn't identify. It may be prudent to conduct more thorough reconnaissance before committing our full forces. Tarak's mandibles clicked in irritation. The Emperor expects results, not caution. We will establish a landing zone, secure a perimeter, eliminate the human presence, and begin mining operations. Standard procedure, executed with overwhelming force. He turned to the holographic display of the planet. The anomalies are likely just interference from the Krillium deposits. And the humans? Asked Sergeant Kale, his voice a gravelly rumble. Clean them out, Tarak replied without hesitation. They have no recognized claim to this world. Their removal is authorized under Imperial Directive 7. As the briefing continued, Alara exchanged a concerned glance with Vorl. Both had spent enough time in the field to develop instincts beyond military doctrine, and something about Typhon Primus triggered those instincts. But the Void Clause operated on confidence and decisive action. Hesitation was seen as weakness, and weakness was intolerable in the Cthar Empire. 3 hours later, the assault carrier entered Typhon Primus's orbit. The drop pods, sleek obsidian capsules designed to penetrate planetary atmospheres with minimal detection, were loaded with troops. Tarak addressed his forces through the neural network linking all Cthar soldiers. Void Clause. Today we claim another world for the eternal glory of the Empire. Typhon Primus will surrender its riches to us, and any who stand in our path will be crushed beneath our might. For the Emperor! For the Emperor! The psychic response from 10,000 minds roared through the network. The drop pods launched, streaking through the atmosphere of Typhon Primus like a meteor shower. They tore through layers of storm clouds, buffeted by gale force winds and electrical discharges that would have destroyed lesser craft. The Cthar pods, however, were engineered for exactly these conditions. As they descended, the planet's true face was revealed. A landscape of towering vegetation unlike anything in Cthar records. Trees that would dwarf the largest imperial towers stretched to the sky, connected by a web of glowing vines. Vast clearings revealed what appeared to be lakes of iridescent liquid that shifted colors even as they watched. The designated landing zone was a relatively sparse area near one such lake, approximately 20 kilometers from the detected human settlement. The pods slammed into the surface with practiced precision, forming a perfect circular perimeter. Within minutes, the Void Claws emerged, weapons ready, and began establishing their forward base. Massive defense turrets, shield generators, and command modules were quickly assembled from the larger cargo pods. Governor Tarak stepped from his command pod, flanked by his officers. For a moment, even his arrogance faltered at the alien majesty surrounding them. The air was thick with moisture, filled with spores that glowed faintly as they drifted. The vegetation pulsed with bioluminescence in patterns that almost seemed deliberate. Strange calls echoed from the depths of the forest, some like crystalline chimes, others like deep, reverberating drums. Breathable atmosphere, Alara reported, studying her instruments. Oxygen levels slightly higher than Cthar standard. Significant presence of unidentified spores and microbial life. She captured several samples in containment fields. I recommend troops maintain sealed armor systems until we can analyze these more thoroughly. Tarak nodded, for once not dismissing her caution. Agreed. Sergeant Kale, establish a security perimeter and send out scout teams. I want eyes on the human settlement within the hour. Yes, Governor, Kale growled, already barking orders to his squad leaders. As the base took shape, the first scout teams ventured into the luminous forest. The Cthar moved with practiced efficiency, their armor's adaptive camouflage blending with the surroundings. Each 6-soldier team carried enough firepower to level a small city, supported by hovering sensor drones that scanned in all directions. Team Apex, led by Lieutenant Mord, advanced toward the human settlement. They moved through underbrush that seemed to recoil at their touch, past fungi that emitted soft whistling sounds as they passed. "Something's wrong with my sensors," reported Specialist Vex, tapping the side of her helmet. "Getting intermittent electromagnetic interference." "Same here," said another soldier. "And my armor integrity monitor is showing microscopic degradation along the joints. Some kind of corrosive agent in the atmosphere." Lieutenant Mord raised a claw, signaling a halt. "Run diagnostics," and he never finished the sentence. A shadow dropped from the canopy above, massive, silent, and blindingly fast. Before the team could react, it had seized Vex in elongated appendages and vanished back into the trees, leaving only a fine mist of bluish Cthar blood hanging in the air. "Contact! Contact!" Mord shouted, his troops forming a defensive circle, weapons pointed outward. "Hostile creature. Unknown classification. Specialist Vex is down." Through their neural link, the base commanders experienced the team's panic and confusion in real time. Governor Tarak immediately dispatched reinforcements, while Alara frantically analyzed the few seconds of recording they had of the creature. "Impossible," she muttered. "It moved too fast for its mass. The biological readings don't make sense. It's as if it reconfigured its cellular structure during the attack." Within 20 minutes, 3 more scout teams reported similar encounters. Each time, the attacks came without warning, targeted a single soldier, and concluded before effective resistance could be mounted. The attackers varied. Some witnesses described tentacled forms. Others spoke of creatures like animated vines, and still others reported attackers that seemed to phase through solid matter. At the landing zone, tension mounted. Sergeant Kale coordinated the defensive preparations with grim efficiency, positioning automated turrets and sensor arrays in a layered defense. Vorl analyzed the attack patterns, searching for logic in what seemed like random strikes. "They're testing our capabilities," he finally concluded. "Each attack targets a different type of soldier: communications specialist, heavy weapons medic. They're assessing our strengths and weaknesses." "That suggests intelligence," Alaris said. "But our scans don't show any brain structures large enough to support that level of strategic thinking in the local fauna." Governor Tarak paced the command module, his composure cracking. "What about the humans? Could they be controlling these creatures somehow?" "Unlikely with their technology level," Vorl responded. "But they may have some understanding of the local ecology that we lack." "Then we move on them now," Tarak decided. "If they're the key to this, we eliminate them and the threat disappears. Prepare the assault force." Despite growing concerns from both Vorl and Alara, Tarak ordered a battalion of Void Claws to advance on the human settlement. 500 elite warriors moved through the forest in attack formation, supported by hover tanks and air drones. As they approached the coordinates of the human presence, they found something unexpected. Rather than the prefabricated structures and industrial equipment typical of human outposts, they discovered an integration of technology and biology. Structures that appeared grown rather than built rose from the forest floor, their surfaces covered in the same bioluminescent patterns seen throughout the ecosystem. They seemed almost to pulse in rhythm with the surrounding vegetation. "This isn't a settlement," Alara whispered through the neural link. "It's a symbiosis." The Cthar forces established a perimeter around the alien structures, weapons trained on every opening. For several tense minutes, there was no movement, no sign of human inhabitants. Then, as if responding to an unheard signal, dozens of figures emerged from the structures. They were unmistakably human, but their appearance sent chills through even the hardened Cthar warriors. Their skin was interwoven with the same bioluminescent patterns as the surrounding flora. Their eyes glowed with an internal light, and in place of clothing, they wore what appeared to be living tissue that shifted and moved with their bodies. They made no aggressive moves. They carried no visible weapons. They simply stood, observing the Cthar forces with expressions of calm curiosity. Governor Tarak's voice rang through the neural network. "Attention, human inhabitants. You are trespassing on territory claimed by the Cthar Empire. You will surrender immediately and prepare for relocation. One of the humans, a tall female with patterns of blue light flowing across her skin, stepped forward. When she spoke, her voice carried easily despite the distance. We cannot leave. We are Typhon now, as Typhon is us. We suggest you depart while departure remains possible. Tarak's response was immediate and predictable. Open fire. The forest erupted into chaos. Cthar weapons discharged in unison, releasing streams of superheated plasma toward the human figures. But the attack never reached its targets. The very air seemed to solidify, the plasma rounds dissipating against invisible barriers. Simultaneously, the forest itself came alive. Trees bent at impossible angles, their branches extending like spears. The ground split open, releasing creatures that defied biological classification, amalgams of plant and animal characteristics that moved with terrifying coordination. The battalion's neural link became a cacophony of terror and confusion. Soldiers reported weapons malfunctions as their equipment was compromised by microscopic organisms. Armor integrity failed as corrosive substances secreted by the vegetation accelerated molecular breakdown. The hover tanks sank into suddenly liquefied ground, their crews trapped inside. Fall back, Lieutenant Commander Zex ordered, realizing the hopelessness of their position. Tactical retreat to defensive positions. But retreat proved as difficult as advance. The forest had transformed into a labyrinth where paths, visible moments before, disappeared or led to dead ends. The Cthar found themselves separated, disoriented, and picked off by creatures that seemed to materialize from the environment itself. Of the 500 warriors sent to assault the human settlement, less than 100 returned to the landing zone, and they brought horror with them. At the command center, Alara examined the survivors with growing dread. Many bore physical wounds, lacerations, burns, broken limbs. But more disturbing were the biological changes. Patches of bioluminescent material had attached to their armor and, in some cases, penetrated to the carapace beneath. Those most severely affected reported sensations of voices or presences in their minds. Parasitic infection, Alara reported grimly. The spores we detected, they're not just passive particles. They're active biological agents carrying genetic material that can interface with and potentially modify host organisms. Can you develop a countermeasure? Tarak demanded. Alara's bioluminescent patterns flickered in distress. This is beyond anything in our database. The complexity suggests deliberate engineering, but at a level that would require centuries of focused evolution or technological capability far beyond what humans should possess. Outside the protective barriers of the landing zone, the forest had grown visibly thicker. Vegetation encroached on the perimeter, plants growing at accelerated rates. The defensive turrets fired periodically at larger creatures that tested the shields, each one different from the last, each one seeming to probe a different aspect of their defenses. Governor, Vorel said quietly, we need to consider extraction. This operation has encountered resistance beyond our capacity to overcome with current resources. Tarak's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of intense stress in Cthar physiology. Retreat? The Void Claws have never retreated. The Emperor would have my carapace stripped from my still-living body. With respect, sir, interjected Sergeant Kale, if we don't leave soon, none of us will have bodies to return to the Emperor. Before Tarak could respond, the perimeter alarms blared. All around a landing zone, the forest was advancing. Not individual creatures now, but a coordinated wave of biological matter. Trees uprooted themselves, walking on root systems that functioned as primitive legs. Vines thick as transport cables whipped through the air, testing the shield boundaries. Swarms of insectoid creatures formed dense clouds that obscured visibility. And behind it all, observers reported glimpses of the altered humans, directing the assault with subtle gestures. It's the entire ecosystem, Alara breathed, watching the sensor feeds with horrified fascination. The planet itself, is rejecting us like an immune system attacking an infection. Turok finally broke. Signal the merciless. Begin emergency extraction procedures. Priority evacuation of scientific personnel and command staff. The evacuation order spread through the neural network. What had begun as an invasion became a desperate scramble for survival. Dropships descended through the increasingly turbulent atmosphere, many damaged by airborne organisms that sacrificed themselves to disable engines and navigation systems. The landing zone, designed to accommodate the orderly deployment of an invasion force, became a bottleneck as 10,000 soldiers competed for space on too few functional evacuation craft. Discipline began to fragment as survival instincts overrode training and loyalty. Through it all, the attacks intensified. The shields failed in sections, allowing waves of Typhon's defenders to pour through the gaps. Close-quarters combat erupted throughout the camp, Cathar warriors fighting with increasing desperation against an enemy that seemed to learn and adapt to their tactics in real time. Sergeant Kale organized a rearguard action, his veterans forming a protective cordon around the evacuation zone. "Get the scientists and the data out," he growled to Vorl as they crouched behind a barricade. "Someone needs to warn the Empire what we're dealing with here." Vorl clasped forearms with the old warrior. "Your sacrifice will be remembered in the Hall of Heroes." Kale's damaged antenna twitched in grim amusement. "Just make sure there's still an Empire to remember it." He turned to his troops. "Void Claws. Show these abominations how Cathar warriors die." With that, he led a countercharge against an advancing wall of biological horror, a writhing mass of tentacles, claws, and adhesive appendages that had once been separate organisms but now functioned as a single entity. Vorl raced to the command center, where Alara was frantically downloading research data, while Governor Turok, wounded and in shock, stared at sensor displays showing the collapse of their position. "We need to go now," Vorl insisted. "The last functional shuttle is prepping for launch." They half-carried Turok through corridors filled with smoke and echoing with the sounds of battle. Twice they encountered hostile organisms, once a swarm of flying creatures with razor-sharp appendages that left deep gouges in Vorl's armor, and once a massive, amorphous entity that flowed like liquid but struck with the force of industrial pistons. The landing pad was chaos. Wounded soldiers fought to board vessels already beyond capacity. A dropship overloaded with troops listed to one side, its engines straining, before crashing back to the ground in a ball of flame. The neural network, once the pride of Cathar military coordination, had become a channel for spreading panic as soldiers shared their final moments of terror and pain. Their shuttle, the last command vehicle with functional systems, sat on the pad with engines already cycling. As they approached, a massive shape erupted from the ground beneath it. What might once have been classified as a burrowing animal had transformed into something more akin to a mobile mountain of muscle and chitin. It seized the shuttle in appendages that looked unsettlingly like human arms enlarged to grotesque proportions. "No!" Turok shouted, his composure completely shattered. "We can't be trapped here." From behind them came a battle cry. Sergeant Kale, his armor shattered and blue blood streaming from multiple wounds, charged the creature with a handful of surviving warriors. They emptied their weapons into its mass, targeting what appeared to be sensory clusters. The creature released the shuttle, turning its attention to this new threat. "Go!" Kale roared through the neural link, even as the creature enveloped him and his soldiers. Vorl dragged Turok and Alara up the shuttle ramp. The pilot, seeing them board, immediately initiated launch procedures. The craft lurched upward, barely clearing the landing pad, as more creatures converged on the position. Their ascent through the atmosphere was a gauntlet of biological anti-aircraft defenses. Flying creatures sacrificed themselves against the viewports and engine intakes. Spore clouds, so dense they functioned as solid objects, buffeted the craft, searching for entry points. Electromagnetic bursts, generated by what Alara theorized were colonies of specialized organisms, disrupted navigation and communications. By the time they reached orbit, The shuttle was operating on minimal power, its hull compromised in multiple sections. Of the 10,000 Void Claws deployed to Typhon Primus, only 23 were aboard this final evacuation craft. The Merciless was nowhere to be seen, either destroyed or forced to retreat by the planet's unexpected defenses. Set course for Outpost Krell, Vorl ordered the pilot. It's the nearest Imperial facility. He turned to find Alara attending to Governor Turok, who had collapsed into a command seat. His wounds are severe, she reported, and there's evidence of spore contamination in his bloodstream. I've placed him in medical stasis, but she left the implications unspoken. Vorl nodded grimly. Do what you can. We need to preserve as much data as possible for the Imperial Command. They must understand what happened down there. The journey to Outpost Krell took 17 standard days. Each day brought new horrors as the survivors began to show signs of the planet's influence. 3 soldiers, their carapaces showing patches of luminescent growth, had to be euthanized after they became violent and tried to sabotage the life support systems. Others reported dreams of alien landscapes and voices calling them back to Typhon. Governor Turok deteriorated rapidly. The medical stasis slowed, but couldn't halt the progression of the contamination. His proud exoskeleton developed patches of soft, plant-like tissue that glowed with the same patterns observed in the altered humans. In his increasingly rare moments of lucidity, he spoke of visions, a vast, interconnected consciousness that had observed the Cthar through thousands of eyes, that had tasted their thoughts through the spores they unwittingly inhaled. On the 12th day, Alara made a devastating discovery during her self-examination. The early stages of transformation had begun in her respiratory system. The spores had established colonies along her breathing tubes, gradually altering her cellular structure. It's only a matter of time, she told Vorl privately, showing him the microscopic images. I've been containing it with targeted antibiotic applications, but the organisms are adapting faster than I can respond. We'll find treatment at Krell, Vorl insisted, though both knew this was beyond Imperial medical science. Listen to me, Alara said urgently. This contamination isn't just a disease, it's a vector for information. As it progresses, I'm experiencing downloads, packets of knowledge about Typhon's ecosystem, about what happened there. She described how humans had arrived on Typhon Primus decades earlier, a small scientific expedition with no military purpose. They had discovered the complex ecosystem and, rather than exploiting it, sought to understand it. Over time, they realized the planet's biosphere functioned as a superorganism, not quite sentient in human terms, but possessing a distributed intelligence capable of complex adaptive behaviors. They didn't conquer it, Alara explained, her bioluminescence flickering with increasing irregularity. They offered themselves as nervous system components, focusing elements for the distributed consciousness. They became interpreters, translators, and eventually regulatory nodes. They gave the planet's defenses purpose and direction. Why would they do this? Vorl asked, struggling to comprehend such a choice. Symbiosis, Alara replied. The humans gained knowledge, extended life, experiences beyond their evolutionary limitations. The planet gained focus, purpose, direction. Neither controlled the other. They merged into something new. On the 15th day, Governor Turok died. His body had transformed to the point that it barely resembled Cthar physiology. In his final moments, he spoke through vocal structures that should not have existed in his species. It knows us now, he whispered to Vorl. The network, it absorbed our neural patterns from the battlefield. It's learning, adapting, and it's not confined to one world. There are others, so many others. After Turok's death, Alara's condition deteriorated rapidly. She worked feverishly to document everything she had learned, compiling data files and analysis for Imperial Command. She extracted tissue samples from herself and preserved them in stasis fields for future study. You must convince them, Vorl, she insisted during one of their final conversations. The Empire cannot fight this enemy with conventional means. Every world with a biosphere is a potential Typhon. Every ecosystem could become a weapon if pushed to defend itself. And the humans, they're not conquering these worlds in our sense of the term. They're becoming part of them, awakening them. On the 16th day, Elara called Vorel to her quarters. She had sealed the room and was visible only through a viewport. The transformation had advanced visibly, her exoskeleton now more plant than carapace, pulsing with complex light patterns. "I can't go back to Kthar's space," she said simply. "What I'm becoming, it would be catastrophic if it escaped into our biospheres. I've prepared everything you'll need, all my findings, recommendations, analyses." She gestured to a sealed container. "There's a final gift in there as well, a sample of a neutralizing agent I've developed. It won't cure an infection, but it can prevent one if administered before symptoms appear. Enough for you and the other survivors who haven't shown signs yet." Vorel pressed a claw against the viewport. "There must be another way." Alara's mandibles formed the closest approximation of a human smile her altered physiology could manage. Always the tactician, looking for the optimal solution. "Sometimes, old friend, there is only sacrifice." She touched her side of the glass. "When we reach Krell tomorrow, I'll take the damaged escape pod. The autopilot is programmed for a course into the nearest star. It's better this way." Despite Vorel's objections, Elara followed through with her plan. As the shuttle approached Outpost Krell, she sealed herself in the damaged escape pod and launched into space. Vorel watched on the sensors as the tiny craft altered course and accelerated toward the system's sun, carrying the most brilliant scientific mind he had ever known to a fiery end of her own choosing. When the shuttle finally docked at Outpost Krell, only 7 survivors remained. Tactical Officer Vorel and 6 common soldiers, all treated with Alara's neutralizing agent. They were immediately placed in quarantine, subjected to intensive decontamination procedures, and interrogated separately by Imperial security officers. The debriefings were grueling. Initial reports were met with skepticism and accusations of cowardice or hallucination. How could the elite Void Claws, pride of the Empire, be defeated by plants and animals? How could humans, with their primitive technology, pose such a threat? But the evidence was irrefutable. The shuttle's logs contained thousands of hours of sensor data and visual recordings. Tissue samples from the deceased showed biological changes that defied Imperial science. And Vorel's testimony, delivered with the precise, logical manner for which he was known, gradually convinced even the most skeptical interrogators. After 3 months of quarantine and investigation, Vorel was summoned to a secure communication chamber. The holographic presence of Emperor Xandros himself filled the room, his multifaceted eyes studying Vorel with cold intensity. "Tactical Officer Vorel," the Emperor began, "your report has been disturbing. The High Command questions whether such a threat could truly exist without our previous awareness." Vorel stood at rigid attention. "The evidence is conclusive, Your Eminence. Typhon Primus represents an entirely new category of threat to Imperial expansion, not through superior technology or martial prowess, but through biological adaptation at a scale and speed we cannot counter. And these humans? You suggest they have found a way to weaponize entire ecosystems. Not weaponize, Your Eminence. Partner with. They have become symbiotic nodes in planetary networks, facilitators rather than controllers. It is a fundamentally different approach to power than our own." The Emperor was silent for a long moment. "Your recommendation? Establish exclusion zones around all worlds displaying similar characteristics to Typhon Primus, particularly those with detected human presence following this unusual pattern. Conventional military action against such worlds is futile and threatens to expose more of our forces to this biohazard. We must develop new strategies before attempting any further contact." Another long silence followed. Vorel knew his career, possibly his life, hung in the balance. The Kthar Empire did not adapt easily. Its strength had always been in overwhelming force and technological superiority. What he proposed was anathema to Imperial doctrine. Finally, the Emperor spoke. "Your recommendations will be implemented, Tactical Officer Vorel. The zones will be designated green zones in our navigational databases, to be avoided at all costs by Imperial forces. The massive holographic head leaned closer. But know this temporary retreat is not acceptance of defeat. We will study this enemy. We will develop countermeasures. And we will eventually claim what is rightfully ours. Of course, Your Eminence, Vorl replied with a perfect salute. The Emperor's image flickered and disappeared, leaving Vorl alone in the chamber. He allowed his rigid posture to relax slightly, feeling the weight of the past months press down upon him. He was the sole surviving officer of the Void Claws, the bearer of a humiliating defeat and harbinger of an existential threat. His future would be one of permanent scrutiny and distrust. Yet as he left the chamber, Vorl felt something he had rarely experienced in his military career: doubt about the inevitable triumph of the Cathar Empire. The humans weren't building warships or energy weapons to challenge Cathar supremacy. They were doing something far more insidious. They were awakening the worlds themselves. How many planets had the Empire dismissed as worthless because they lacked exploitable resources or strategic positions? How many worlds teeming with life had they ignored, not recognizing the potential sleeping within their biospheres? And how many of these worlds had humans already reached, already merged with, already transformed into defensive superorganisms waiting for the right trigger to awaken? For the first time in his life, Tactical Officer Vorl considered a future where the endless expansion of the Cathar Empire might be forced to stop, not by superior firepower or technology, but by worlds that fought back with the very essence of life itself. In the quarantine facility where he would spend the remainder of his days, Vorl compiled everything he could remember about Typhon Primus and the transformed humans. Sometimes, in dreams, he still heard the whispers from the spores, distant echoes of a consciousness vast and alien, yet growing more familiar with each Cathar mind it touched. And sometimes, he wondered if Alara had truly chosen her fate, or if the planet's influence had already grown strong enough to ensure its secrets remained protected. The Cathar Empire continued its expansion, but now with caution previously unknown in their history. Their long-range scouts were ordered to identify and avoid the green zones, where signs of advanced ecological activity and minimal human presence coexisted. The Empire's scientists studied Alara's data obsessively, searching for weaknesses in this new form of defense. But deep in quarantine, Vorl knew better. In the silent game of cosmic evolution, the humans had found a strategy that bypassed traditional concepts of warfare entirely. They didn't need to outfight the Cathar. They simply needed to outlast them, one world at a time, as the green zones slowly multiplied across the galaxy.